Now, okay, welcome to Creative Team Management Week 12. This is our last lecture today. So for this subject, so today we're going to be talking about ethics and how it applies to the workforce, especially for creative people. And so what we're going to be doing is we're going to be defining a lot of terms as per usual, looking at a few theories and stuff like that and throwing around a few ideas. It's actually a good one to end on because there is a lot of movement and there's a lot of talk in the media, various media, and we have been touching on this throughout the course, about things changing in terms of the culture of workplaces. And this is incredibly important. We're actually in a very sort of pivotal time, I think, from my perspective, sort of looking back over the last, 20 or 30 years in the workforce. This is the biggest change I've seen in workplace culture. And it's sort of come on the back of things like the Me Too movement, but also COVID and various other things happening at this time that is just changing people's attitudes towards work. And this is having ramifications about ethics, or let's just say that ethics have always been important, but there are certain times when, ethics, it really depends on who's writing the rules, doesn't it? So what's happening now is that people are turning the tables and actually saying, hey, this isn't ethical and this isn't right, it needs to be fixed. So how does that happen, and how does that affect us in the creative industries? It actually affects us quite a lot because we tend to be quite sensitive people. We know this. We tend to be people who like to have our autonomy, but we like to have a structure around us and various other things like this. So ethics impact us enormously. And like we talked about with things like the culture actually coming down from the top of the organization, it's the same with ethics. And it's the same in government as well. So it all comes down from the very top. So that's kind of the way things trickle down. So yes, we'll be looking at various definitions and a few theories and whatnot. We have a new housemate whose name is Andrew. Hello, Andrew. Welcome.
Hey, Andrew.
Hi.
Andrew, how you doing?
I'm good. Yourself?
Not too bad. Not too bad. Welcome aboard. And we're just talking about ethics. So we're just talking about the introduction to ethics. So one, just as a little thing that you may have heard, you've heard people say, yeah, I was just following orders. You may see this. This is a cultural reference as well. So the reference to things like war atrocities and things like that. Hey, I was just following orders. I didn't actually mean to kill all those people. It's his fault because he told me to do it. So that really is not a good excuse. So really ethics comes down to the individual making decisions about what is ethical and what is not ethical. But again, this is affected by what is happening up above. It's not a good place to be. So there are certain supply chain ethics as well in production. So how you treat people in business and how businesses kind of mesh together to make things happen. There are certain things you do and certain things that you don't do. And like I was saying, the interesting thing about this time in history is that things are changing, and even things that were acceptable 3 years ago, and now people are going, hey, that's on the nose. That is not good. And I don't know if any of you have been following the news. I have a terrible addiction, I have to admit, to following American politics late at night, watching YouTube videos. I've got to stop doing it. But Andrew Cuomo, the New York mayor, has just resigned because he's up on many sort of sexual allegations, and he's gone. He's gone because he was doing the wrong thing, and he has been doing the wrong thing for quite some time. He was sort of seen as a bit of a hero during the COVID pandemic, though, because he was standing up against Trump. But it turns out he actually is not a very, very, very nice person, and he's been called out, so he is actually gone. And I don't think that would have happened before. I think there are people who are being kind of leveraged out of their positions, and they're going, hey, this isn't fair. I'm a white man. You can't do this to me. And people are starting to realize that that's not enough. And even I saw an interview with the disgraced mayor, and he said, I don't really understand what's going on, what I've been accused of, But what he actually said at the press conference was, I didn't know that the goalposts had moved. I was just doing, I'm just a normal guy doing normal things, but they moved the goalpost, and so now I'm guilty. So he was laying all the blame for his actions and all of the groping and all of the name calling and all the shaming and all of the unwanted sexual advances on his staff. He blamed all of that on society moving the goalpost as to what is ethical. That's interesting, isn't it? So that's what we're fighting against. So this is happening today. This happened, this only happened yesterday. So there's lots and lots to chew on here. That's really, really interesting. But we'll discuss a few concepts that you may have heard of before, you may not have heard of. Some of them are really cool. I really love the universalizability principle because it's actually quite hard to say. But it's a good one because that's the one. I'll just start there because we started there. What it means is if you take an action and someone says that's not a right action, or that's a wrong action, or that's a right action, you sort of decide whether it's right or wrong by universalizing it. So what if everybody did this? So say you throw a piece of paper on the ground, okay, and someone says, hey, that's the wrong thing to do, and you say, well, it's just one piece of paper. It's not going to kill the planet. And the other person says, but what if everybody did that? So that's the universalizability principle, is when you say, if it becomes universal and everybody does it, then it's not an ethical thing. So that's really cool. Utilitarianism, you may have heard of Machiavellianism, or you may have heard someone described as being Machiavellian in terms of their dealings. It's usually meant to denote a sort of evil, but it has a more specific meaning that we'll go into. The deontological theories, which have nothing to do with teeth, I've discovered. Aristotle's virtue ethics is a good one to have a look at. You've all heard of Aristotle, so we'll be delving a little bit into that. Rights and ethical relativism. So we'll get to that towards the end. But at the end, we sort of talk a bit about rights like racial equality and things like that. So it's a very interesting topic. Okay, so the first one we had on the list there was utilitarianism. So that happens when the best course of action produces the greatest balance of pleasure over pain for everyone, or let's say a positive outcome for everyone. So that is where you you average it out. So let's look at something that's happening right now. So like all these outbreaks in the States, so people are having to decide every day, and I would want to be one of them, whether we shut down a state. So the best course of action will produce the greatest balance of pleasure over pain for everyone. That's it's a tough call. So let's keep everyone healthy, because pleasure and pain, or let's just say a positive outcome so people are not getting affected. Okay, so the best thing to do for everyone is to shut everything down. But there are people who are going to be experiencing extreme pain, being in lockdown, being shut down, and dealing with mental health issues. Plus, you've got people losing their income. You've got businesses who are shutting down, people who have mortgages and kids and stuff like this, and all of a sudden they have no money coming in. So it's always a balancing act. So it makes you feel sorry, I get distracted by the chat and then I have a laugh and I forget what I was talking about. So it's a tightrope. So the best course of action for everyone. So that's utilitarianism. So that's sometimes seen as basically what's best for the most people. And I'm sorry about the graphic. I couldn't find anything. I mean, how do you find a picture of utilitarianism? So there's an old movie I discovered called Utilities, which, has anyone seen that? I'd pay $100 to meet someone who's actually seen that movie, because it's also on video cassette and video disc. Anyway, I've never heard of it. I've never heard of Robert Hayes or Brooke Adams actually either. Okay, so another aspect of utilitarianism, it's also known as a teleological theory, or something that's known as consequentialist, because it's basically focused on exactly that. It's focused on the consequences, the end result. So it's not so much about the way that you achieve that result. So this is two important factors in terms of this particular facet that we're looking at. So there's the the end result. Okay, so it's the goal that you're looking at, but then there's a cost of getting there. So how do you actually get there? So these are the two things that are kind of flexible. We focus on the end result. We don't give a stuff about how we get there, or we take care of people. We care about how we get there, and we go, well, the end result might not be exactly what we want, but we've got to look after people. So these are the kind of decisions that people are making every day. These are heavy duty ethical decisions that are taking place. It's a bit outside the realm of creative industries, but it's such a big in-your-face example of what's happening today. It's very hard to ignore. So the actions are determined by what is in the best interest of the majority of people. So that's the idea of majority rules. You're trying to please the most amount of people, even if the result is maybe not desirable. You'll find that, you know, politicians will do this because they will be choosing the best course of action, which will produce the greatest balance of acceptance over rejection in terms of their constituents. So that's what politicians are about. They just want to actually make the decisions that will get people to vote for them. Not so much worrying about what the actual decision is. It's more about their ability to sort of keep their business afloat, which is politics, unfortunately. Okay. I've lost my thing. Here we go. So we've all heard that, maybe have heard the term Machiavellian. It's usually, I get this, when someone says, you know, this person here was a Machiavellian ruler, I imagine someone who's kind of like, and really kind of evil and like has a torture chamber and stuff like that. But really it's a bit more, complicated than that. But it really is about focusing on the end result and not really caring too much about what happens in between. So it's a no-nonsense effective strategy for heads of state. In a ruthless divided world, this is Machiavellianism. It's all about getting that result no matter what happens. So it's obviously named after Niccolo Machiavelli. And so it's an example of consequentialism like we were talking about in the last slide. So it's totally focused on the consequences and not the ends, not the means rather. In fact, the ends justify the means. So that's one way of thinking about Machiavellianism, is the ends justify the means, and often at great cost. So we know people, leaders, and we've talked about leadership. It sort of comes down a bit to a leadership style. So we can see how ethics leads directly into leadership, and we know how leadership affects creative people and the people who are working underneath them. There's a great quote from the Sandland textbook: if murder and devastation will better secure the objective being attempted, then that is what he advocates. So, hey, people have to die, people have to die. So that's kind of that extreme example there. Now, deontological ethics. Now, deon, Greek word for duty. So this is focus more about the way that the result is secured. So there's more attention paid to the way things are done. Okay, so it's a bit different to Machiavellianism because we're sort of getting rid of that sort of losing, winning at all costs kind of thing. So the main thing to focus on there is going about the result, but focusing on the way that it's done. So there's more attention paid to the way things are done. Now, there was a study done, and it was done, I think, a long time ago, but in the advertising industry, and looking at ethics there, and finding that even in the advertising industry, they were using utilitarian ethics as a preference. And not using so much the deontological one. So more, it just became a real sort of pit of burnout, if you like. So sometimes industries suffer from burnout, and this happens a lot in the games and animation industry. So this is where ethics comes in a little bit. So if you're, you've got a crunch on for your game, Andrew's got a game project that he's working on, and he's hired all of you as outsources, so you're all contractors, you're working for him, you're building individual assets. Okay, the deadline's next week, and you're all going to have to pull 12, 14-hour days for the next week to get there. Now, one of you has come down with a flu. Andrew, there's a chance that you might make the deadline. What would you do in that situation? What steps would you take? Would you just say, okay, Hannah, you've got the flu, but you're just going to have to work and push through? Or would you take other steps? And what other steps could you take at this point?
Well, I know realistically, in that situation, it'd probably be you have to work. But would it be possible to like delay it, maybe?
Mm-hmm. That would be, so you could go to the client and say, is there any chance that we could extend the deadline? But maybe an example of what you could do is say, okay, well, you're not well, so what about a contingency plan? So is there another freelancer who could be in sort of standing by in case Hannah can't make, or maybe can hand some work over to somebody else? So there might be a contingency plan that you could deal with in-house before you go to the client and say, look, we're going to break the deadline, which could actually be detrimental to you in the future, even though it's not your fault and these things happen. So that's a possibility. I'm glad you didn't say that, well, no, we just have to meet the deadline. So, you know, if she dies, she dies, you know, it's really sad and everything like that, but, you know, you just got to do it. Yeah. So I'm glad you didn't say that. I'm glad you didn't say that. So I think they're thinking about, you know, and Simon's a good example of this as well. The way he manages, he always has, you know, contingencies and make sure that, you know, because I think we've both been in situations in the industry over the years where suffered from incredible burnout, and time again it just happens, and it always happens through mismanagement. So if any reason that staff get burnt out is because people have not done their due diligence and they've not estimated the amount of effort or time taken. And it's sometimes some businesses can be a little bit cynical and they kind of leave things a bit loose. They leave things a bit loose and not so defined, and they just kind of go, well, the job's just got to get done, you sort it out. So let's just keep it at arm's length and just tell the art director or whatever that it's got to get done. And then people just work until they drop, rather than going, look, you know, 3 weeks ago we noticed that this was happening, so we've actually got someone else coming in to help you so that we can finish on time, and that everyone, it costs them a bit extra. So that's, you know, another thing. It always costs money to be ethical, and that's why some people aren't ethical. But you know, you might have to spend the money, but you save your stuff, and then when you've got the next project coming in, everyone is well and able and happy to work on the next project. So it pays dividends in the long run. So I think the whole thing of the ends justify the means and just bloody get it done. And so what if we kill people? Some people think that's a great way to go, and it might be in some industries, maybe in the war industry, but not in creative industries. And it really, it sets up a really toxic environment as well. So getting away from the utilitarianism, sort of Machiavellian way of looking at things, and look at things that are a bit more ethical and look more towards the individual rather than the whole. So there's a balance. You can't really go totally one way or totally the other, but it's just a matter of where you situate yourself as a business within creative industries. So virtue ethics, and here we have a picture of a very virtuous young man from what movie?
Up.
I know you all knew it. You're just too lazy to unmute. You're like,
I didn't realize I had muted myself.
So you're just going,
come on.
What's his name?
I was going to say Eugene. That's incorrect. That's Tangled. It's, oh, I know it.
Begins with a D, doesn't it?
Cindy's waking up. I saw movement in the city.
Russell.
Did you just Google it?
No. I was just like, it's not a D, but it's. I was just going through.
It's an R. It looks a bit like a D.
It looks like a D. It's just got legs on it.
It's just missing a leg. Yeah, I keep calling him Kevin. But no, it's Russell.
Kevin's the bird.
Kevin's the bird. Kevin is awesome. I love Kevin. Okay, so virtue ethics. What do we mean by virtue ethics? This was something that Aristotle used to talk about, and really talks about what kind of person should we be. And it talks about character traits, which we've talked about before, traits, and we've talked about values. So virtue ethics, it sort of brings values in as well. And we've talked about values. It encourages the cultivation of ethical character traits, such as being dependable, having courage, being honest. I would include in that the courage to be vulnerable, and that comes in with honesty as well, and that encourages true growth. Builds trust in managers. So if you have a manager who is obviously quite an ethical person, just through the way they go about things and the way they deal with people, you just get a bit more respect for them. And it doesn't matter what industry you're in. It could be in the service industry, it could be in catering or hospitality, or it could be in creative industries. So having that trust in the managers is really important. And when you're in a position like a supervisory role, it doesn't matter what it is, how you act really affects people, and they will see straight away whether you're an ethical person. I'm trying to give you an example. Have ever of you been like traveling in the days when traveling was possible, or you've been somewhere where and you've met new people, and you've had to make a decision very, very quickly about people? And I often find this happens when you're traveling, especially if you're traveling on your own. You meet people and you just go, yep, no, I don't think I want to know you. And you just kind of have to make these decisions. And these decisions might be based on actions the person has done, which kind of trigger your antenna for these virtues. And you sort of think, yeah, just by the way you see someone kick a dog or something, you go, you're not a nice person. It's like, no, you just look at the actions, maybe not something as outrageous as that. But we do pick up on these things, and they're actually a lot more subtle than you think. So yeah, building that trust is incredibly important. Okay, so this kind of ethics, so the virtue ethics, more concerned with the benefits of behaving virtually, and that becomes its own reward. Virtuous people are attractive to work for. So that's exactly what I was sort of saying. So not sort of overly virtuous, but if people if you see them as having virtue, and they're sort of they're walking the talk, so they're actually doing what they're talking about, they're enacting their espoused values, then that's something that we find attractive in terms of a work situation. Okay, so, and it also speaks to what we contribute being more value, if you like, or giving us more value than what we own. And this is something that comes down to a lot of Buddhist philosophy and a lot of philosophy in general. So actually contributing rather than owning things. So that's all about being part of something rather than just necessarily accumulating stuff, which is something that we tend to do. So we tend to collect things, not virtues. But virtues are actually what you will accumulate if you sort of act in the right way. If you just sort of do your thing the right way, then it will sort of happen. So one of my favorite ones, so this is Immanuel Kant. So yes, the universalizability principle. What if everyone was to employ that, the conduct in question as a universal law? So what if everybody did so? What if everyone threw a piece of paper out the room? Or what if, didn't wear a mask? Or what if everyone didn't follow lockdown laws? Or so when someone says, oh yeah, but it's just me, I'm jumping across the border, look at me. But what if everybody did that? So you've got to think about, well, you're not special, you don't have a special set of rules just for yourself. Okay, and I've mentioned piracy here. So the idea of piracy. So what do we think about piracy? So people say, well, I just, it's just one little thing, it's only, it's something I found on the internet. But again, what if everybody did that? If everybody did that, the person who created the thing that you pirated would not get paid ever. And one day that could be you. So it's a matter of putting yourself in that position as well as a creative and think, oh, okay, well, ethically, would I want someone to download my stuff? No, you wouldn't. So it's starting to think about things in a slightly different way. So where are we now? Okay. I'm just checking the time. I'm just catching up on the chat. It's all right. It's like there's a whole conversation.
Have you seen Full Metal Alchemist?
No, I have not, but I've heard a lot about it.
Bits and pieces of this chat is going to go over your head.
It will. But I'm glad you're keeping yourselves occupied while I'm talking. It's all right. Okay. Right. So this is important to you guys because all of you at some stage will need to stand up for your rights. And that might be from a legal point of view, moral, or intellectual property rights. Gosh, I've got a friend who has written movie scripts and, he's had to take other people to or to get legal advice because people have suddenly used his idea and stuff like this. So as an artistic worker, as a creative worker, you need to be aware of what you're entitled to. So you are entitled to intellectual property rights, legal rights and moral rights as well. So managers need to know these rights and they need to treat people to this standard. What happens is sometimes some companies will fly under the radar a little bit with regards to this, and you might find people's legal and moral rights may be abused, and maybe even contractual rights as well. Cases where I've seen this happen. So recently graduated students working for a new company and they get treated appallingly. And why is this, and what's this got to do with ethics and rights? Well, you have a certain certain rights when you sign a contract to work for a company. There are certain things that you are required to do, and certain things that you shouldn't be required to do as well. Let's just throw this out there for a second. So let's just say it's your first day on the job with a company. I think I might have mentioned this example before, but it's a good time to mention again. Let's just say your first day on the job and you get sent out by the person who's supervising you to go and do some personal shopping for them because they don't have time. And all of a sudden, so you're not working on the job, you're going out and doing this thing. What would you do in that situation? So what are the steps you would take? So let's say, you're really worried about, because you've just started this job, you want to make a really good impression, and someone's asked you to do something that you don't think should really be not part of your normal job description. Or let's say it's something like, oh, well, you're new, so you can make coffee for the entire team. Well, let's say you probably do that because you might just go, well, that's what everybody does. It's kind of initiation. But what if something is a bit outrageous? The boss took you into a room, he took his shirt off and said, take a picture of me, it's for my wife for her birthday, or something like that. And you go, I know. Hands like, what? What would you do? What would you do? Because it's your first day on the job and you really want to keep this job. How would you handle that? And there's no right or wrong answer to this. So let's just hear what you think.
It really depends on the situation and what I'm being asked to do.
Okay, well, let's say it's not as radical as taking your shirt off and getting someone to take a picture of you. And the reason that popped in my head is because that has happened in a company that I worked at. Let's say they've sent you out to buy a birthday present for the boss's daughter.
I mean, if I hadn't been officially inducted yet and there was nothing else that I knew that I could be doing, I'd probably be like, yeah, okay, I'll do this one task. But if it keeps consistently happening, then I definitely speak up about it and be like, hey, so I can do a lot more than just step out and get coffee for everyone. Do you want to take advantage of that, or shall I move on?
I like that. That's good, because it's you're standing your ground, and you're reminding them of what you're there for as well. So that is exactly right. So your first day, I would too, when I was in my 20s or whatever, if I'd started a new job, I would do anything, I'd be a human ashtray. I'd walk around, because everyone smoked in those days. So you'd walk around catching ash if you had to, just to get into the industry. People would start off as runners and they would be literally picking up dry cleaning, dropping film off to be developed, because that's what happened in those days and stuff, and picking stuff up and coming back. So it's a matter of when it's appropriate, and you sort of hit the nail on the head there. So if it happened again 6 months later, or if it sort of happened on a semi-regular basis, that then maybe other people were starting to go, oh, well, Hannah, she's always out getting stuff. So do you mind going to the bakery for me on the way back and stuff like that? And that's when you turn around and you give them that little speech. So I guess it depends on what is appropriate. So yeah, on the first day, maybe it is appropriate, but on, when you've been there for a while and other people who are employed in the same role as you maybe aren't being asked to do these things, then you would have a very good reason to approach management and to actually ask to sit down and say, hey, look, I just need to talk to you about this, because you've got to be careful, because the person who hires and fires could be the person who's asking you to do these things. So it could come down to a point where you go, well, I can't work here anymore because I feel as though I'm sort of being treated like a 1950s housewife in this company full of men. And if you're a woman in a company that's mainly full of men, they will let you do all the cleaning up in the kitchen. They will let you do all of that stuff because they don't care about it. And that will then split into gender roles. So that's why we need to have, even if it is initially a matter of maybe nodding towards quotas a little bit, but having more equal balance of genders in the workforce is so much better, and it just makes things a lot more enjoyable to work in as well. Okay, so workers' rights are incredibly important. You need to know them. You especially need to know about intellectual property, because that is yours. That is what is going to keep you safe and warm in your old age, hopefully, is that things that you have developed, you're going to hopefully make money from them in the future. So you all end up working in industry, hopefully, but hopefully you all work on your independent projects as well. And hopefully you all develop your own stories and games and properties. So then those are yours, and you need to protect them and make sure that people don't rip them off. Okay. Something I'd like to talk to you now about is ethical relativism. So what do you mean by that? Well, it means that everything's relative, so there's no absolute right or wrong. Like we looked at in the previous example, it depends on the circumstances. So it depends on what is going on around you. It depends on the context. Relative to the culture. So if you think about it that way, you might go, well, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. So when you're in another country, you may do things that wouldn't normally be done in Australia. So a simple example of that might be you go to Italy and you start having, aperitifs in the afternoon or something, like having afternoon drinks or something, which you don't normally do. I mean, unless you've got a problem with it. But little cultural customs and things like that you tend to do when you're traveling. You tend to sort of get on board with it. And this tends to encourage respect for other cultures and other belief systems as well. So if you think back into history, we may see some cultural practices as being particularly barbaric, but they were accepted at the time. And, because of that relativism, it was seen as, oh, that's just what they do here. And one of the, I remember listening to a podcast the other night when we were driving to Brisbane, and it was about the real Mulan in history, Mulan. And in the original story, she actually was on the way to having her feet completely bound up, like the horrible tradition of binding young women's feet so that they become totally deformed and they become pretty. Okay, don't get me started on that, but that's a very barbaric practice, absolutely barbaric. But it was accepted to the point where it's actually considered beautiful in Chinese culture. In the story with Mulan, she unbound her feet and they actually recovered, but that wouldn't normally, I think that'd be very unlikely to happen. But it was just such a shocking practice. And it's just hard to get your head around how that even started. Whose idea was it? And just to deform people for some arbitrary aesthetic. It just absolutely blows me away. So enjoy the graphics. So some historical practice. And we're seeing this now, that things that in the past were seen as being okay are actually not okay. Why isn't the law enough? So I put a picture of the law in. There you go. So if ethics are enshrined in the law, it becomes a bit of a pickle. And what happens in that case is that things become very inflexible with ethics, because it is a bit of a situation of how you frame the ethics or how you view them and what the context is. It's a bit hard to sort of make them hard and fast. Laws also, the legal system, very hard to adapt and very laggy behind a contemporary practice. Just look at the laws around, I don't know, cryptocurrencies, look at laws around even, COVID at the moment. Yeah, they're changing all the time, and they're just not keeping up with what's happening. And these sort of traditional bureaucracies very slow to catch up with what's actually happening in the world. Okay, so things like best effort, good faith, due care, these are kind of soft terms that are very hard to define within the law. And also it's something you can't just say, well, it's law, because every country has a different legal system. So there's no sort of standardization there. So in terms of ethics, it's beyond the law. The law can't just make the world ethical. It can't just be, we make being unethical illegal, because it is totally unenforceable. So in some cases, companies can actually win cases, but then actually fall behind because people see that as being a horrible thing. I think of some of the things that have happened, like Rio Tinto blowing up Juukan Gorge last year. 45,000 years of human civilization blown up by a mining company. Great. But they said, but legally they're allowed to do it. So it was okay, not. And they've suffered a lot from that, and rightly so, because it was a shocking cultural terrorism, in fact. Conflict of interest. You've all heard of conflicts of interest. Wonder if you've all heard of bribery. You know what bribery is. So when self-interest comes into a conflict, so it's when self-interest comes into conflict, rather, with your ethical and legal duty. Sometimes, I think this happens more often than we realize, even in places that we think it doesn't happen. I think there are conflicts of interest happening all the time. Unfortunately, we see this. You're all young. You probably don't spend every night watching the news as avidly as I do. But the older I get, the more I'm just absolutely shocked by the actions of people in power, men and women in power, who just seem to be serving their own interests, and it just seems to be just getting worse and worse and worse. So, and a lot of the times it's with conflicts of interest, and I've experienced this personally in the industry, working for a film funding body in another state of Australia, and being on a panel selecting projects with panelists who are in direct competition with the applicants. And even bringing this up to people in the organization, it just got kind of, guess who got the projects? Interesting stuff. It happens. And I remember when I was interviewed for that job, I was actually grilled about transparency and ethics and appropriate behavior. And I was absolutely gobsmacked by what went on there. So how do you fight that? How do you fight those conflicts of interest? So it might not just be a bribe. It might not be that. It might just be getting yourself into a position of power within an industry where you can get financial benefits and work and things for yourself or for your mates or for your cronies. And this, unfortunately, is a lot of how a lot of businesses actually operate. I'm just going to mute myself very quickly. Thank you. So I just had to make an ungodly noise, so I just have to mute that. Okay. So how do we fight these conflicts of interest? How do we stop this from happening? So you need to have clarity. So this is something like what we talk about in terms of transparency. So people knowing what is going on. So whenever you get obfuscation, whenever you get people trying to cover up or trying to muddy the waters and saying, hey, there's nothing to see here, those millions of dollars we gave to Harvey Norman, hey, don't worry about that. That's all good. Just look at this. Here's some car keys. How do we fight that? It's very, very, very hard. So codes of contact, guidelines and policies, but transparency, actually being able to have a look at the books. You know, this is why Donald Trump hasn't released his tax records for so long, is because he knows that they're going to find something. Things can be actually moved up the pipeline, if you like, when there are conflicts of interest. That might work unless the higher management are part of the problem, in which case...
I have to get going now, sorry.
Oh, okay, JJ. Thanks for coming, and thanks for your attendance and everything of the course. So if you've got any problems with the assessment, just send me an email and I'll get to you, even if it's over the tonight or over the weekend.
Yep. See you guys. Have
Yeah.
a good holiday.
Have a good day.
Hey, JJ, have a good one. Cheerio. Oi. Okay. So that may or may not work depending on the management, and structural changes, making things more credible, that confidential information actually stays in the business. You're not having leakage of confidential information, which could also be part of the conflict of interest. So loose lips sink ships, as they say. Okay. So something that's very important for you guys is protecting your ideas and making sure that people don't take your ideas and steal your future, which is what you don't want to have. So things like copywriting things, trademarking things, like your designs and your projects, making sure that they actually belong to you, so protecting them properly is super, super important. So upholding the principles of copyright and the value of intellectual property is a huge challenge in the creative industries, especially in this time that we're in at the moment. Any thoughts as to why it's particularly important at the moment, as opposed to 20 years ago or something like that? We sort of touched on it before. So copyright, intellectual property, protecting that. Why is that so important in the 21st century compared to in the past?
Because it's far easier to steal ideas now.
Absolutely, Hannah. It is so cheap to copy something. It is very, very expensive. So one of the natures of creative industries is that we tend to spend a lot of money making stuff that is very cheap to reproduce. So burning a CD, a game, or stealing, downloading a movie or something like that. I mean, very, very expensive to produce, very cheap on a per item basis, like a song, 99 cents. But if people keep downloading them, the artists don't get paid. So if you want to keep working in these industries, then you have a vested interest in fighting for these rights, because this protects your future employment, your future income streams. So hopefully some of you will be doing things like you'll be doing side gigs that will earn you some money, maybe become YouTubers or something like that, and have something really interesting to say. And over time, this will turn into an income for you, and you need to protect that, because that is yours. You shouldn't be giving it to anyone else. So moving on to moral rights. What do we mean by moral rights? We all know what morals are. They're complex and they change from territory to territory. So it could actually be a factor of culture, a factor of geography, etc. So there's also, in general, you want to have the right to attribution. So for example, using your work, if someone uses your work, fine, that's good, that's what your work is for, but you want to be attributed. You want that work to be attributed to you, so people know that you did it. So you want to be accredited, and you want to be paid for it properly. You want to be not falsely attributed to something that you didn't do, especially if it's something that's rubbish. Some directors, if they decide halfway through a film, they decide they don't want anything to do with it, they actually use a pseudonym for the credits, so that people don't know, like, I didn't direct that film, it's someone else. There's a specific name they use and I can't think of it. The right of integrity, which means the right to have not your work subjected to derogatory treatment and mutilation. So that means not taking someone's work and then, for want of a better description, kind of bastardizing it and then stealing it for yourself. So you have a right for your work to be used as it was intended. Okay. Discrimination, harassment, and affirmative action. So interesting stuff to talk about, especially in today's world, the way things are going. Things are being called out, and it's messy because we're seeing a lot of bad behavior called out. We're being exposed to a lot of bad behavior. I think just because we're talking about it all the time, we're seeing it all the time. And so it just seems to be everywhere at the moment. Stereotyping is one of the worst things that we can do. When we were talking about archetypes, right? We talked about, okay, archetypes are cool, but we want to avoid stereotypes and cliches. Stereotypes tend to be simplifications. They become boring because they're simplified and not putting enough thought into it. So stereotyping is lazy and it's morally repugnant because it really strips people down from their individuality, and they just become a symbol for another culture, which is not good. So discrimination can be based on things like race, obviously, color, religion, sex, national origin, age, handicap, and pregnancy. Any other things there? I'm trying to think, is there any other way we can be discriminated against? Any other forms of discrimination that you can think of that I haven't mentioned?
I'd say appearance in terms of what aesthetic you dress as.
I was going to say class.
Hey, that's good. That's good. I like that. And especially today with our fixation with appearances. What about
Political preference?
Yeah. What about that? Being discriminated because of the vaccine status?
I'd say that would fall under political identity.
Is it? Ah, okay.
Everything's political.
It is. That's interesting how, because it has become a political thing, whereas before it was basically people supposedly deciding on scientific fact whether they did or they didn't. But it has become a very political thing. Very, very interesting. So, and Cindy, you mentioned politics as well, didn't you?
Good. Can we still make fun of Karens though? Is that still okay?
We can.
Okay.
I think that
I promise,
is
I do it all
essential.
the time at work.
Thank you.
Yes,
they are getting bolder.
They are. It's like they're like feral animals in the woods that are coming in and sort of coming into people's yards and things. It's like, get back into the yes, they are a force to be reckoned with. Which I don't know why I've still got that. I used to have my camera mounted on that. So if you're wondering why I have a piece of wood hanging out in the foreground, that's why.
Blended in nicely with the background. So
there you go. It sort of blends in, sort of disappears. Right. So we tend to get a lot of publicity around gender and racial discrimination, but there are other forms of discrimination as well. And I put the vaccination thing in there. It's interesting because people are saying, but what is the world going to be like in 3 years' time? Are we going to be moving around? Is a vaccine passport going to be a regular thing? And is that going to morph into something else? I read something interesting. This is just my little brain fart. Don't worry about it. I read an article saying that people who get COVID suffer from long-term mental impairment, even from a mild case of COVID. So if humanity broke into vaccinated and non-vaccinated, the non-vaccinated people might evolve into a different species of lower intelligence and actually be a totally different subspecies. And they might morph into something different. I don't know. There's a science fiction idea for your next project.
Yeah, let me scribble that down.
I know we could be actually, locking down, and then you have unvaccinated people coming up to your door and up to your windows, going,
and that's how the apocalypse starts. Honestly, if the zombie apocalypse was going to start, I feel like it would be something to do with vaccines.
Yeah, totally. And funnily, a lot of those, the zombie trope usually starts with a vaccine or some event that causes this to happen, and there's a split. Interesting times. So,
damn you, Umbrella Corp.
What's that, Cindy?
It's a damn you, Umbrella Corp. It's a
yes
reference.
It's all Klaus's fault. He's too damn watchable. discrimination, harassment, and affirmative action. So some positive changes have been made, but there's still a very, very long way to go. I've just popped a link in there for Screen Australia Gender Matters. It's just a little link you can go and click on. It may be out of date now, even though I only put it in last year. So talking about gender matters within the workforce. At the moment, there are young male executives working in Hollywood who are sort of, if you like, pushing out the Harvey Weinstein. Yeah, the old gropey, bloody horrible producers that prey on especially young women. They are getting pushed out slowly. I don't think I wouldn't say that all the young men coming through are going to be squeaky clean either, but there is a change happening, and it is a positive one. So, and it's not a matter of whether it's which gender you are. It's about treating everybody with respect, and it's not always men who are at fault. Okay, sexual harassment is a very, I'd say, an interesting topic, and it's something that is just, talked about so much at the moment, but it is something you just need to be aware of. We do need to talk about it because it is an important part of navigating today's working environment. So there is an increase in a lot of legislation internationally to reduce sexual harassment in the workplace. And sometimes the risk can be higher in some creative industries. I think really, so take Hollywood. So that's an example that we're seeing a lot of, where men in power, in particular, we're using that power in an abusive way. And I think also in the music industry. So it's almost like oh yeah, when someone says, oh, that's really rock and roll, it's sort of like, well, yeah, that sort of rock and roll is sort of a bit sleazy, and it's sort of that culture comes from this whole thing of women being a bit objectified in a lot of in the music itself, and also in the culture around the music. So in creative industries, it can actually be more prevalent than in some other industries. I wouldn't say animation is particularly rife with sexual harassment, but I would say in the games industry, it probably, from what I've heard from female co-workers and also ex-students, that it's still happening. It is still happening. So what do we do? Just use your bloody brain. Just don't walk around and give people unwanted neck rubs. It really comes down to common sense at the end of the day. But for some people, it is not as easy as that, obviously, because we've seen how many people cannot actually do something that is just we see as being common sense. So we need to be aware of this in the industry. There is so much to talk about it. I don't really need to go into it. But what I can talk about, if we start just talking more about also talking about race and gender as well, and how discrimination works. A good temporary measure, I think a good temporary measure for engineering better outcomes in the long term, is by actually forcing a quota system. So actually forcing equality at the beginning and then gradually backing away from it. So not actually instituting it as, okay, every time this business, every year you have to have equal number of male and female staff. Let's work for a target of having an equality by a certain point of time, and then just let it have a natural momentum that actually takes the company into a different cultural and ethical direction. That is the way to do it. So by setting quotas are just such a sort of hot potato. Everyone's like, no, you can't use quotas. It's going to put people in there who don't deserve to be, blah, blah, blah. But something has to be done to redress the balance. And then, like a bicycle wheel spinning, you spin it and then it goes by itself. You don't have to keep spinning it. It should have its own momentum to correct the problems that have been sort of accreting and building up over years of kind of mismanagement or skewed leadership that is more gendered towards men. So some organizational pain and dysfunction involved in this, but it's about getting that stability back. And really the pain and dysfunction just comes from men who don't like being told what to do. I read an article this morning about a plan to build a new art gallery in Alice Springs, and all the judges in the courthouse have complained about it because they want to build it on their car park. Just think about that. So that's interesting, isn't it? The judges, they're holding up, the building of a big new art gallery that would be great for the residents. It's great for culture. It's great for visitors, but they want to stop it because they're going to lose their car parks. So it's okay, but these are very powerful people, so that they could actually stop this from happening. Interesting. So maybe I'm not saying I don't know anything about the judiciary, but they're probably all old white men. A lot of them tend to be. So exploitation, unfair dismissal, and just compensation. When you are dismissed unfairly, you can actually receive compensation for that. Okay, so it takes a lot of motivation on the part of the employees. I'm just reading that, said that doesn't make sense. High levels of intrinsic motivation on the part of employees can make them vulnerable to exploitation. Yeah, within the industry, because we are so driven, I've seen this quite a few times, where someone who's incredibly passionate about what they do and they're doing a job. I've seen managers just let them go, even when they've been overworked and they're obviously doing way too much, but they're doing such a good job of it, they just let them go. That is a form of exploitation, because that person then gets relied on to do a lot more work, and they're taking on all of these extra roles. But it's a failure of management to let someone get into that sort of position. It shouldn't happen. And unfortunately, it happens to really highly motivated people, because they are focused, especially in the creative industries, we're focused on the project at hand, focusing on the not just the outcome, but the process, and also the things that we're getting out of it. So stress and burnout can be major problems. And I must admit, I've been through a couple of production cycles that have left me feeling pretty burnt out at the end of it, and just jobs that done for a year or something, and then just had to leave because they just become so unbelievably pressurized. And sometimes this it can be a two-edged thing. When you start a job and you start doing it and you put a lot of effort in the first couple of months, you sort of give 150% effort, and then they go, well, we expect you to continue at that. And you think, well, maybe I shouldn't have pushed too hard at the beginning, because now they expect me to keep that up. And a year later, you're actually getting sick, you're getting migraines every second day and all this sort of stuff. And it's just like, it's not worth it, because you end up burning people out. You've got to replace them.
This is exactly what happened when I started working my first retail job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You were too good.
You always get encouraged, oh, go in when you can. It shows that you're motivated. So you kept going in, and then they expect you to go in, and then when you say no, they guilt trip you.
Yes. That's right. If you love this, you would...
my work.
Is it the same for you, Anna?
Yeah, well, we used to get only like half the amount of orders that we usually got, so it was fine to kind of go full send for a while there, but now all of my 5-hour shifts are turning into 9 hours.
Wow.
I don't have the energy.
No, God. A 9-hour shift doing that, I could not do it. I'd have to kill somebody.
Oh, it's not so bad, but when the customers start yelling at us for things going wrong, that's actually a system issue and not a human issue. It gets real exhausting. Totally.
Yeah, blaming people for things that they've got no control over. I always try to think back to that Brené Brown animation that I showed you when she's talking about blame. So when someone's blaming, what they're doing is they're just basically purging their own pain out at you. So that's what blame is. So when we blame someone, when we kick something and we go, bloody, why'd you leave that there? It's just, we're getting out our pain. So yeah, it must be hard to take that though, especially when you've got a raging bull Karen right in front of you, blaming you for something you've got no control over. That would be very hard.
I tried to explain it to her, and she just said that I needed to get better customer service skills and that I was bad at my job. So
really?
I'm like, yeah, I'm not taking that today. I'm gonna go inside. Someone else can do your order for you.
Yeah. Thank you very much for your feedback, madam.
My first job was at Hungry Jack's, and in the summer, every day after school, everyone would come in for all the friggin' ice cream and frozen drinks. And then, like, the machine can't keep up. So then you have to go, I'm sorry, the machine's unavailable at the moment. They're like, oh, every time I come in here, the ice cream machine doesn't work. It's like, well,
You come in
Yeah.
during a rush. We can't help that. Come in at a time.
That's right. It's because we see you coming and we switch it off.
can you not see the like other 50 cars behind you, or the 50 that were just in front of you?
Oh, she actually pointed out, she was like, you've got 8 cars in the driveway. And I'm like, I know, I have eyes. I promise you that I can see them. It's just that we only have 2 staff members available to help out right now. So
yeah, it's so not your fault. I feel so sorry for service staff, and I always try to be extra nice to people because, you know, I think anyone who's actually been in those jobs, you tend to be a little bit different. You know, when you've actually dealt with people at the front line, you know, basically, I mean, just the public walking up and talking to you and stuff like that, it is just, yeah. It's
actually, just to give the public a little bit of just a little bit of hope in humanity. There's this one guy who used to come in, and I remember his order. It was a Whopper Junior with cheese minus mayo, light lettuce, light tomato, etc., etc. He always like gave me this vibe that you don't mess with this guy, but he was always so friendly. So I was always happy to serve him. Yeah. So one morning he comes in, and this other customer was in at the time, and it was just these 2 in the dining room, or 2 groups, I should say, because I think the other guy was with someone else. And this other person in the dining room decided that they were going to have an argument and then threw their drink all over the floor.
Wow.
So this regular customer stopped him and was like, no. And then he turned to me and told me to go get a mop bucket. And then I'm like, yeah, no worries, I'm on it. And I brought it out. And I was about to mop up the floor, and he's like, no, this guy's going to clean it up because
I love customers like that. They're just so delightful. You never see them coming.
So great.
Yeah, they stand up for you.
Like, oh, thank you so much.
Oh, that's a lovely story. That's probably the best story we've had. That's awesome.
Yeah, that's really nice.
That's great.
Not all customers are shitty people.
Well, dare I say, conflict resolution?
I mean, if my boss saw it, they'd probably tell me off for not cleaning it up. But
there's an idea for your conflict resolution. I mean, you could all do the same idea if you want. Customer service.
Can we all work on the same project?
Yeah, you can if you want.
Collaboration.
I don't think you've got enough time.
I know. I wouldn't even know how to make that into a short animation.
Yeah. Well, think about economy. And because you know, you've got the technical skills to do it. It's a matter of getting that. Getting the idea across. Anyway, we will talk more about it at the end. But I think we're getting close to finding something. Okay. So what can be hard for people, and it can be hard for teachers as well sometimes, is failure to place boundaries around professional time and personal time. Depending on what you do, your job might sort of bleed into your personal life. This can happen, especially if you're working from home, because people don't respect your boundaries if you're working from home. They do now, but I tell you what, if you're someone who worked from home, if you were a freelancer in the 80s or 90s or back in the day, whenever you told someone you worked from home, they just saw that as a reason to get you to do things because you're not working. You know, they just assumed that you weren't working. It was just such an unusual concept to work from home, unless you were one of these weird people who had your own business. So you were known as a sole trader or a contractor. But working from home just was not a thing. So I think you need to be really careful with that now more than ever, to make sure that you have boundaries around your personal time and to actually try and manage that. Workers in creative industries report a higher prevalence of occupational stress than in general, including things like mental health issues. This is something that ties back to our very first lecture when we first started talking about the characteristics of creative people, was that a lot of creative people, and this was the Journal of Psychology, saying that creative people were more prone to these kinds of things, which seems to make you know, a certain kind of sense to me. What about compassion? Is there room for compassion in the workplace. Definitely, I think so. Managers, especially managers within creative industries, so creative managers should have some compassion. So when you're leading creative people, you need to have some compassion. Recognizing things that can actually affect creative people, like insecurity, vulnerability, self-doubt. These things are always there, no matter where we are in our career. So being able to recognize these things as a manager, being able to bring some kind of resolution to these situations in a supportive way is really, really important. So seeking to support and protect your employees where you can, rather than attack them because you can. So this is really, really important. And look, I've worked with some amazing managers, and I've worked with some really bad ones. And I think that the compassion, I think compassion is linked very much to empathy, and empathy was something that we talked about earlier as well. Having the ability to feel into someone's situation and to actually walk in their shoes and to really experience it and to have that kind of connection with them is much better than just, feeling sorry for someone and feeling sympathy. So empathy is really important, and compassion. I think that flows easily from people who are empathetic. I think compassion is something that we encourage, but some people have it more than others, definitely. Okay, now just compensation. So what does just compensation mean? It means you're getting fair pay for a fair day's work. Okay, so that's what we all want, really, is yes, we want to have creative lives. We want to work on all of these great projects. We want to be creative in what we want to do and have all the benefits that brings for us. But we want to get paid for it as well, because we need to exist in the world. Now, often there are big pay differentials between different countries, which actually leads to a lot of richer countries and richer companies actually outsourcing work to cheaper places. So, for example, animation series often being farmed out to other countries. I've worked for companies that have farmed out to Russia. We had to redraw an entire series, I think about 3 episodes of The Silver Brumby, because they just totally stuffed it up. All the characters came back not on model. They had to be redrawn. That was really terrible. Korea, India has a massive animation industry, and they do a lot of outsourcing for a lot of Western projects. But these people aren't getting paid very much. And the reason why people aren't getting employed in Australia or America or England to do some of the more sort of day-to-day tasks within the industry, so maybe doing like the checking, physical checking of the animation, the paint and trays, the coloring and everything like that could all be outsourced somewhere else. So a lot of people in Australia who could do those jobs aren't getting those because they're being sent somewhere where it's a lot cheaper. So that, we need to think about that if we want the craft, if you like, of animation to continue and grow. It's kind of got to be looked after. What happens is that once this happens, this outsourcing sort of happens, then we lose the skills. So in manufacturing as well, so even in heavy industries and stuff like that, we get stuff done overseas because it's too expensive to do it here. Then all of a sudden there's a lockdown, and we go, oh, we haven't got any of those things because we got them made overseas, and now we don't have any because we don't make them here, and we've forgotten how to make them. So this is interesting because the world is changing, and we're going to have to start making stuff again. This is going to have some big ramifications on just the whole structure of society, in the coming years. Something light to end on. I want to show you a list of terrible things that have happened in film productions, and I don't know why I find this fascinating. I do, because it's morbid. So these are all the things that have happened right from the very first filming location. All the things that have happened in films. Oh, I love this one. The Woman God Forgot, 1917. In one scene, extras are required to be thrown up the side of an asset Aztec pyramid. Pyramid was built of wood covered in paper on which sand had been glued to create the appearance of stone. The extras were sandpapered as they slid down the slide of the structure. Having expected such injuries, a crew member was waiting at the bottom with a bucket of iodine.
I just read the top one.
Across the border.
Big yikes.
Yeah. Cast member Grace McHugh filming a scene where a character was crossing the Arkansas River in a boat. Boat capsized, camera operator immediately jumped in the river to save her, dragged on sandbar, was put to be quicksand. They watched helplessly as they were both sucked into the sandbar and drowned. Oh, isn't that terrible? Gosh.
Wow.
I know, they're all just so tragic. Yeah, so it goes from the 1920s all the way up to the present day. It is really. We won't dwell on that because it's pretty negative.
So we going back over that. I do kind of want to read. There's a morbid fascination now.
Yeah,
Once you start, Hannah, you cannot stop. Trust me.
That's what I was saying. I share your humor in the macabre as well.
Well, the link's there, so you can click on it and have a really good session. You could easily kill a couple of hours reading about all those things. Morbid fascination, definitely. So many creative organizations have a lot of exposure to occupational health and safety, especially where you might have things like if like a sculpture studio or something that just popped in my mind, or a studio that has flammable liquids or something like that. Some of the animation studios that Simon and I worked in the day, they were basically just warehouses full of paper with people walking around smoking all day. At Universal,
I can only expect good things.
Yeah.
Cindy.
Used to often see a pile of drawings with an ashtray sitting on it with just some smoking cigarette butts sitting in it, and you just walk around, you just see it. It's hard to imagine. I can't really imagine, even though I did, working in a company where people sitting around you smoking, and especially with so much paper everywhere. It's pretty amazing now to think that was even allowed, but it was totally a fine thing to do. I'm really glad that's changed. I hate smoking. It really annoys me. Okay, so many creative organizations have a lot of risks. Occupational health and safety, as you know, is heavily regulated, and it's not just enough to have these things, but the company needs to know about them and then need to actually practice them. So the company has to do what's called hardwire these things into their core operational processes. So just making sure that these things don't happen. So banning smoking in the workplace obviously reduces fire hazard, and that might have even had an impact on insurance premiums. Although I doubt it, they would. I think they still would have charged a lot of money. Okay, so the safest cultures to work in are ones where everyone understands what their role is in the safety of the place. So, for example, being like a fire warden or something in a company just means that you get half an hour off a month to do a fire drill or something, and you get to wear a plastic hat and look like Bob the Builder. So getting involved in that sort of thing is good within the company. So everyone playing a role, so everyone knowing where they have to go when if there's a fire alarm or something like that, so the meeting points and all that sort of thing. So if everyone is aware of that, that means it's a safer place to work. And now with COVID as well, so there's a lot of occupational health and safety going to be purely around COVID. So for example, at Collarts, every second day or every week, there's an email coming out saying students are allowed on campus in these rooms, but not in these rooms, and various edicts coming from above. And that's all part of this occupational health and safety kind of being a bit fluid and sort of slowly, settling around this idea of COVID and how we manage it. So it comes into a day-to-day management thing. So everyone is aware of the fact that we need to wear masks. Everyone is aware of social distancing. So in that sense, everyone in the country is playing a role. Everyone in the world is playing a role in the safety of everybody around them. So it's almost like we have occupational health and safety for our lives at the moment, not just for our work. And I just love that graphic.
It's like one of the few times he's hurting himself in the face, but actually has face protection.
I know, it works on so many levels. Great, okay, we've absorbed that. What about marketing and advertising? What about hype? What is hype, and how does that sort of fit into this whole thing of talking about ethics? I honestly, this is just my personal opinion, I think marketing and advertising are incredibly unethical. I think that they really do try to psychologically manipulate people into basically creating profits for people. And I just think that's, I don't know, I just don't think I could dedicate my life to that, where some people can. I've definitely done work within the advertising industry, but I've always had a bit of a funny thing about advertising. One of the best shows you can watch about advertising is the Gruen Transfer on the ABC, and they're a back episode.
Sometimes.
Hey?
I watch that with my dad sometimes. He loves it.
Cool. It's interesting, isn't it, when they pick apart advertising, they pick apart the whole ad thing, and they talk about why they do things in a certain way. And it's really cutthroat. It's so that they can just get to the pocket of the consumer. It's really kind of it's kind of interesting. So I'd recommend you. That's great, Hannah. You can learn a lot from watching shows like that. It just makes you a little bit more aware about what's going on in the advertising industry. And when you read something or see something, you can actually sort of you can break it down and see what's actually going on behind that sort of the hype or the facade. So what people are consumed are protected by false claims. So there's a fine line between saying this, like a snake oil salesman from the Old West saying, this here elixir will cure all your ills, it will fix you and do all this sort of thing. You got to protect people from that kind of hype. But the advertising industry sort of goes almost up to that point. I mean, how many times have we seen a sign saying, the world's best milkshake, come in here for the world's best milkshake? It's not the world's best milkshake. It's a lie. It's not. But, we accept that advertising lies to us. But what about when it's lying to us in a way that actually could be harmful, like people taking out ads or people trying to...
There's a really good example of this. Lorna Jane, her fashion brand, marketed that their activewear clothing had like a COVID shield on it, like actual things in the fibers that would protect you against COVID, which was completely false. And she's now being sued for, I think, not negligence, but like failing to stop her marketing team from putting that forward.
Right. Yeah, from putting out misleading information or something like that.
Yeah.
There's an MLM, which is bad enough as it is, that sells essential oils. It claims that it can cure you or keep you away from COVID and shit as well. But the shitty part about it is they also advertise for you to put essential oils in your food, which, if you know anything about aromatherapy and essential oils, it actually damages your stomach lining in the end.
I was going to say, that essential oils are for smelling, not for eating. That's very bad for you.
Yeah.
They're not essential in your stomach.
At best, you can put them on your skin, but even then, there's only select few oils that are allowed on your skin as well. So, they're like doing all this damage to all these people who like really believe that, this is giving me all these health benefits and jesting.
Absolutely. It wasn't there that that sort of like chef guy, Pete something or other, and he had some kind of miracle blender thing that was.
I don't remember the blender, but I do remember him talking about not the caveman diet or something.
The paleo diet?
The paleo diet. And he was like, this is going to completely transform your life, but it was actually not that good for you.
Well, he had some sort of product that was supposed to, cure COVID or stop you from getting COVID. And it was just a whole pile of shite. And he got in a lot of trouble about it. But people like that, they just keep going. They just keep coming out with this stuff. So there's a lot of hype.
Sorry, Hannah.
Oh, I just said it's because they can afford to keep doing it, because it's really just like a monetary slap on the wrist for them in terms of fines sometimes.
That's right. I think the the application of some of these rules that are meant to protect us, you know, it doesn't affect some people. It just slides off them because they have the money. They can afford to hire many lawyers and not to be treated like everybody else, unfortunately.
Yeah, but what were you saying, Cindy?
Oh, I was just asking if that was the silver water, because that was another one that was claiming to keep you safe from COVID. And
yeah, I'm not sure, but there's plenty of that stuff about people, you know, capitalizing on something really bad and trying to make money out of it. And
Disney's back at it again, capitalizing on their first ever queer character in Jungle Cruise. Despite the fact that they've had that so many times. And I've seen the scene that they're trying to market as the representation. It's very ambiguous. You could really just say it about anything.
Yep. That's interesting, isn't it? It's like they're really trying too hard in some respects.
They're always like, here's our first openly queer character, and then they're not really open, and it's not really representation. It's more or less just like, hey, we kind of sort of mentioned it. You should like come see our movie because of this one scene. It's super cool. And then when it doesn't work, they just repeat the cycle.
Yeah, exactly. So it's kind of it's that hype, isn't it? So artificially trying to boost sales. You know, things like artist lip syncing performances when they think that they're actually performing live. That's a bit disappointing when that happens. You know, so things like that. So it can actually be, you know, an ethical, thorny subject when it comes to marketing and advertising, because essentially you're trying to sell things to as many people as possible, and you're trying to sell more than your competitors. So what do you say? And some marketing is skewed towards denigrating the opposition and saying better than, you know, 9 out of 10 other brands, or some actually come out, you know, and say, you know, it's better than Coke or better than whatever. I think there are some things you can and can't say with it legally about other products, but it is, I think, for some people, especially people who maybe don't have a great ability to sort through fact from fiction, we have a lot of trouble with some things they read in social media, because sometimes they appear so much to be a factual thing, like an actual news article or something like that. So it's very easy, I think, for people to get confused these days, and it's becoming more and more confusing all the time.
I was going to say something that's perhaps more relevant to the course is how video game trailers will just flat out lie about gameplay to their customers. So then when customers pay all the money, buy the game, and they get into it, they're like, oh, this is nothing like what was marketed towards us.
I think a lot of trailers now have to have not actual gameplay, or they are and what have you, and then you'll have other trailers that'll be like gameplay trailers or something.
Yeah, because there's also this whole big culture about spoilers and stuff like that. People not wanting to spoil the story, but at the same time,
sorry, we cut you off.
Sorry, I was just gonna say, Ubisoft's like notorious for that, for their gameplay trailers being nothing like the actual games.
Has that happened recently, Andrew? Can you think of an example?
A few games, a few Ubisoft games. The Division did that. So did Watch Dogs, Assassin's Creed. Like they just.
I heard something about Cyberpunk as well.
Yeah, Cyberpunk. They said like, because they were hyping it up for years, and they mentioned over that time a lot of features that weren't in the actual game.
Yeah.
And also, when No Man's Sky came out, that was big for that as well. Like half the features they said weren't in the game.
Wow.
They said the game would be multiplayer, and it wasn't multiplayer. They said.
And so did they say, oh yeah, that'll be in the next version?
Yeah, well, they originally said it will be in the game. They never said it will be in the game at launch or we're adding it in. They just said it will be in the game.
Oh, so they kind of pulled it
in the game.
Yeah.
It'll be in the game one day.
Yeah.
I would imagine, though, the gaming community would be pretty quick on the uptake to condemn that kind of thing. Was there a pretty quick backlash?
Yeah, very big backlash.
Yeah. I think that's one of the things that could actually protect the customer and the consumer in the games industry, is that there's such a strong community. It's nothing like, consumers in the past, people who are fans of movies and stuff like that. The gamer community is so connected, and it's really powerful and really strong. It's totally new thing. But I think what I've seen happen in some instances in the games industry is that the fans can actually hold the company accountable, because ultimately, you guys are the ones that are buying it. So if there's a backlash, they may then go, yeah, we made a mistake here. But I've worked for game companies that...
We did that with the Sonic movie, didn't we? We saw their design for Sonic the Hedgehog.
Good example.
Absolutely mental and was like, absolutely not.
Yeah. This is not good enough. Take it back and fix it, and then we'll watch it. Yeah, totally.
I love that we bullied a studio. Well, we bullied the higher ups. The creative team was probably told to do that, and they were sitting there tearing their hair out.
I don't know.
The creative team would have been
a bit ashamed to be concept artist for that. Sorry.
I think some of them would have been, this is what we wanted to do in the first place, and you wouldn't let us. Now you're letting us do it because the fans,
Well, yeah, the higher up, the number pushers would have been like, do this, and the creative team would be like, we can, but when you get backlash, we're just going to sit and watch it happen.
They're not going to like it, but we'll do it. So this is interesting, because this talks to listening to people in the company. So that idea of anyone in the company being able to go to management and say, or in a meeting, put your hand up and say, look, we feel as though this, our feeling is that this is the way it should go. You're saying you want to do it this way, and that's fine. We understand that, but we just want you to know that we've thought about it. And at least it's on the record. So it is something that, happens a lot more in the games industry than, say, in the animation industry or something like that, because it's such a dynamic and growing industry. It's worth so much money, and it is just so popular. Privacy protection is definitely becoming an issue. There's a lot of competitive pressures, obviously, in creative industries, especially in games. So it's more about the economic realities as seen by the number crunchers and the people in the higher end of the industry, not necessarily setting out to be an evil player in that space, but it is just very, very competitive and cutthroat, because so much money is at stake. It is, it's very very powerful. Things like hacking of credit card information from customers and stuff like this. I've had that happen to me just through buying Photoshop from Adobe years ago, and I still get, I don't know what happened to my stuff, my information, but I still get, people contacting me and stuff like that. So I had to change get new credit cards and all that sort of stuff. So it can be really, really dangerous, because so many people are hooked up to these systems. When something happens, it affects a lot of people. So in 2011, the network, the PlayStation network, was hacked. It affected 77 million users. That's a lot of people, and that's a lot of data. So that was a lot of money for somebody. And these things happen all the time. So the more in a way, the more connected we are, we sort of make ourselves a bit more vulnerable. And this is, looking at systems, it's the way, a city becomes big and it becomes vulnerable because it's a target. There's lots of people there, as opposed to sort of spreading out a bit more and spreading the risk as well. So, the video game industry is massive, makes lots and lots of money, but when something goes wrong, it goes wrong big. And when it affects consumers, it affects them in a big way. Okay, sometimes anti-competitive things can be put into place to stop companies from doing the wrong thing. And recently we had a Royal Commission into banks in Australia, and they were all came out smelling like poop, because they're all doing the wrong thing and sometimes doing incredibly illegal things. And not much has changed, unfortunately, which is interesting to see that the government hasn't actually made very many changes to the banking system to protect customers from being put into the positions of too much debt and that kind of thing. In fact, the government is trying to wind back the safe lending laws that they put into place straight after the Royal Commission, because they're trying to get more people to borrow money to stimulate the economy after COVID, which means more people like you guys going into debt and not being able to repay it, which is absolutely shocking. So these companies are still getting away with things. So these companies, these are the companies with espoused values of family and happiness and caring for country, and we're all in it together. But they're actually laundering money for sex traffickers and drug cartels. This is fact. This is what these companies have known is going on, and they are still practicing. But they are worth so much money that no one talks about it, and the government's not going to do anything about it. So watch this space. Ethical banking is something you should look at. And I recommend doing it early in your life, not when you're my age. Find out what industries your bank lends money to. Does your bank lend money to companies that are currently helping to deforest the Amazon, for example? It's well worth looking into these issues, because these companies, they just do what they bloody want, and we accept it because they pay a lot of money to have all of these fluffy ads on television about, the sunset and and the generations of children and Aussie this, Aussie that. Yes, look under the hood. Don't accept what you're told. The more the company has power within a particular market, the more alert you should be to these sorts of issues. And I think that's a very good guideline. So I think the idea of trusting entities, it comes down to your own discretion, and you really need to make that decision yourself as consumers. I think these days we have a lot more choice, but we have a lot more confusion over which choice is the right one to make. So it's sort of better and sort of worse at the same time. Governance, and of course, I couldn't find a picture of governance, so I found a governess instead.
The Chaser.
Yep, I never watch it. I don't know why I even know who that person is. I think it's just from seeing
it now and then.
Yeah, from seeing it on ads, I think just I don't watch a lot of commercial television, but somehow that got in. So in terms of governance, you can put in place certain structures, processes, systems, etc., to try and get these problems as they come through. And you really need to keep an eye on appropriateness of internal accounting systems. I think this is really applicable to arts organisations. And recently, there was an Indigenous arts organisation that was going into receivership or something like that. And it's just the way it was portrayed in the news really annoyed me. It was like they were being accused of mismanagement, but really it could well have been a case of lack of funding or lack of support from the support mechanisms that should be there for those sorts of organisations. So yeah, media spin is a real tricky thing. So in terms of governance, so still talking about governance, introducing ethics filters, strong reference checks. So that whole thing about hiring hard and managing easy comes to the fore in terms of ethics as well. Having codes of ethics to guide employees, especially now. I mean, the actual phrase sensitivity training. Remember, this is great. Dr. Andrew Laming, the conservative politician, who recently, he was the guy who took the photo of the barmaid who was crouching down to get bars out of the fridge and her undies were showing. So he took a photo of it, and the store owner caught him, and then it went to court, and there was a big court case over it. He is now suing the ABC for reporting that incident. So personally, the ABC reporter was sued $80,000 for reporting that incident, and he managed to get off by saying he was just taking a photo of someone who was a hard worker as an example to other hard workers. This guy's got a history of stench behind him as long as your arm. The ABC stepped in and paid this fine for the reporter because they obviously stand behind her. But what the hell is that about? That is just freaking believable. I can't believe that someone could perform such a grubby act and actually get away with it. And he was caught at the time by the guy in the shop, and he made him delete the photo. So someone saw him do it and went, mate, that's just really, what are you doing? And he just stood there and he went to court and he just lied. He just lied about it.
Unfortunately, with the photo being deleted, there's no proof of evidence that it was a lewd photograph. So he could have been telling the truth. We love plausible deniability.
Yeah. Yeah. I think even with deleting it, I think they probably could still get it off his phone. Which I wonder whether he managed to stop that from happening or something. But because I heard about that yesterday and I thought that was just done and dusted. I thought that he'd been found out for what he was like and he was being thrown under the bus and that was good. And then I heard that actually the reporter was being fined $80,000 for reporting it and had to apologize. A female reporter. Yeah, good one. Okay, so introducing ethics filters, codes of ethics, staff induction processes that communicate the values and policies of the organization. Really, really important. But again, it flows down from leadership. So it's really about the ethics and the values of the people who are running the company. A bigger company might actually develop an ethics committee to advise on ethical matters, but usually that's not necessary. And it's a big thing to have a whole department just devoted to ethics. So it'd have to be a huge company like maybe, Google or Microsoft or something like that. Okay, this thing about whistleblowing, it's a very, very courageous thing to do. If you see something that's going wrong or something that's not right, and then you put your hand up and say, this isn't right, when it can have bad effects. So when the global financial crisis was happening, some of the people who were working for Lehman Brothers, one of the big brokerage firms that helped precipitate the crash, they went to their bosses and said, hey guys, this crash happening. Look what's coming. And they just went, nah, and fired them. Just anyone who complained or said there was something bad happening, they just got fired. And they were all on the money. They were all absolutely correct. There was a crash happening and it was devastating. But I guess some people would have made millions of dollars just by delaying making, decisions, just being greedy, just being absolutely greedy about it. So ensuring that whistleblowers can actually be protected. And this way, people can come forward and say when things are not right. Offering these people protection is absolutely crucial. Like Brittany Higgins, who came forward about the sexual assault in Parliament House. People like Grace Tame, the Australian of the Year. Having been through all of that stuff. That these people get really crucified in the media just for coming up and actually speaking out. So there's a lot of support for people who are coming out as victims of sexual assault, but there's also a lot of backlash as well. So it takes a lot of guts to stand up and say something bad has happened. And in a company sense, and also in a private sense as well. So developing ethics education programs are super important, but I think it has to really happen before people get into the workforce. I think really their values are kind of pretty much set, to a certain degree. And I think this sort of thing, I think things like ethics and values and things need to be looked at school more than sort of later on down the track when people are in the workforce. And maybe some ethics training would be better than doing trigonometry and might actually be more useful than, certain other things that we get to study. And okay. And so, like I said before, taking the espoused values and actually enacting them is what ultimately leads us to an ethical system of governance. We respond to that within the workplace as well. So that comes back to actually enacting your espoused values. And doing what you say is super, super important. So environmental ethics, something that is just really another thing at the moment. We have Australian politicians who are actually coming out and criticising scientists for generating, quote unquote, fear porn about climate change. So it's nothing to worry about, guys. It's all just, they're just trying to scare us. There's nothing really happening. So this is what we're being told by the government at the moment, unfortunately. because I tend to think, Cindy?
Sorry, just one moment.
Yeah, that wasn't me. That was Hannah.
Oh, okay. I thought you were saying something. Okay.
I was trying to talk to my sister, but I forgot that I wasn't on mute.
Oh, okay. No worries. So yes, like the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC has just come out with a report a couple of days ago saying that actually it's a lot worse than we thought. So what do our politicians do? They attack the scientists. They try to discredit what they're saying. Does this sound familiar? Does this remind you of another country? We got to watch this stuff, okay? Because these guys and me, we'll be dead, and you'll still be dealing with it. So don't be complacent. This is really, really quite serious stuff. The IPCC knows more about climate science than Matt Canavan, the idiot from the Liberal Party. So we just need to be careful about what we're told and actually fact check things. Another Liberal politician, George Christensen, recently had a speech in the Senate about how stupid lockdown rules were and about COVID safety. So this is the sort of thing we're as a society, we're fighting against people in power just lying for their own political purposes and actually taking science and using it as a political tool, which makes my blood boil. I'm with Greta. I think she's amazing. So managing your personal brand and reputation within the workplace is really, really super important. This is a bit of a side issue. Managing your personal brand, hugely important, often neglected by nearly everybody. I advise every student start thinking about what they stand for, what they bring to the industry, what they plan to achieve, and how they plan to achieve it. Write a mission statement, slogan, or a manifesto. Really think of yourself as a brand like Pixar or Sony. The more you develop your personal brand, the more you'll stand out from the crowd. This is true. This is more to do with stuff like a portfolio development and branding and stuff that Simon talked about, but it is super, super important. In a way, you're going to be selling yourself as a brand. So start to think of yourself as someone with a unique identity in terms of what you produce, because you're starting to get to that stage where you're going to start getting your folios together and start targeting jobs, and you'll be choosing a final project that will be helping you to get there. So you're starting to think about what you stand for within that industry, and that's sort of part of the whole creative industries gig. Oh, and that's our that's the end. And there's no references. There's no homework for you, Andrew. You don't have to go and read all those books. So there you go. Thank you very much. Any questions about what we talked about? And we can talk about the assessment, of course. Any questions? Or is it just questions about the assessment?
Just assessment stuff now.
Yeah, assessment stuff.
Mine's more of a statement than a question.
Yes.
I have been pretty much asleep most of the past week. Like, I think it's been very rare that I've been awake for more than 5 hours. I will try to make you an animation, but if I can't get it done in time, because I've got 2 other assignments I've got to get started on that I was going to start this week or late last week.
Why don't you put in an application for an extension?
I was under the impression you couldn't apply for extensions on week 12.
I'd check that. Just check it with students. So go through the normal process you would go through. And if they say, no, you can't in week 12, I know that
They also want a doctor's note, which means I have to make an appointment with the doctor. And the last time we did that for my other half, so he could get cleared that he didn't have COVID, he couldn't get in for like half a week.
Okay. So it might be like a telehealth thing or something.
My plan for this was I was going to do what I can, if at the minimum,
smash it
do
out.
a storyboard to what I had planned, but
maybe think about something. Have you got something in mind that you were thinking of?
Yeah, I was gonna do the red versus blue scribbling out the big purple thing. Like I was dead set on doing that.
Look, I think there are so many things there, and look, you've been in hibernation, you've had the cold. I know I've just been through it. It's probably the worst cold I've ever had. I totally get it. I think with all of those red and blue things, it's all conflict. It's all conflict. But so it's easy to do a thing where you just show two things beating the hell out of each other. Okay, that's conflict. But how do you show resolution? So that's the tricky part of it. So the idea of like we were talking about before of, customer service, there's a whole queue of people coming through, and one customer is actually causing problems, and then one of the other customers comes in and actually helps solve the problem. It could be something like that. The idea of there are so many different situations that you can think of that have a conflict. So I think choosing something that you're familiar with, like customer service, would be good, or maybe a game situation.
That's cool. Just the longest part for me to do these assignments is the animation bit, because I don't have any animation software, just Photoshop.
Yeah.
So I was like,
you can draw, fortunately, and
I can draw. So
yep.
at minimum, you'll have images, but it might not be sewn together, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. You want to send me something sort of over the weekend, like even tomorrow morning or something like that. So all of you, I know you're under the pump. I know you've got other subjects as well, but you do have to get one in for this, and it's worth 40%. So even if you get something to me tonight or tomorrow morning, or even on Sunday, I don't like checking, if it's due on Sunday night, I don't really like getting work over the weekend, but I will make myself available in case you want some last minute advice or something. But maybe, you've all got the skills, because you've each got your own style of what you're doing, which is interesting watching these assessments come through. And different ways of problem solving. So I think the hardest thing for this assessment for you guys should be working out the idea. And then once you've got it, be like, oh, okay. And then think of a way to do that as economically as possible. So once you've got the idea, then that really, really helps. I would definitely take customer service. Think about anything to do with COVID, and think about how you can symbolize that as well. So you've got someone standing there. Maybe you've got 3 people standing there with masks, and they're just really simple. They're just like Lego cutouts or something, with masks on, and someone comes in who hasn't got a mask, and it's like, and just play with it. And then all of a sudden, something happens, and what the resolution is, maybe, someone puts a bag on the head of the person who's not wearing the mask, or something funny could happen. They could end up getting ejected out of the scene or something like that. But something that represents a resolution to a conflict, it can be very, very, very simple. But the main thing is to try and portray that idea. I think customer service would be good. A COVID queue, something to do with something that's relevant in the news today would be good as well. You could even have, maybe have just the Olympic symbol in the back, and then you've got like people just sort of bobbing around like South Park figures and then jumping or something. I don't know. That sets up. It's just a quick way to storytelling. I guess the Olympics is all gone, but the Paralympics is still on, so you could tie it into that. But you can get inspiration from anywhere. So any situation where there's conflict, I think that would work. But definitely tying it into your own personal experience is good. I think it will definitely help. Yeah, so hopefully that helps. In terms of the style, I really just want to leave it up to you, and try and enjoy it. I know you're under the pump, but the whole idea of changing, this from, this used to be an essay, with references and everything about a conflict resolution in the animation industry. So it's much more fun to do something visual. So try to enjoy it as much as you can, and see what you come up with. Okay, any other questions before we finish up?
I think I have an idea. I'm scribbling it down so I don't forget it.
Flashy scribbles, thank you for the trimester. It was lovely meeting you people.
Thank you.
Absolutely, thank you, you guys as well, and also everyone who watches this who wasn't at today's lecture. Thank you to all of you for this trimester. It's a bit of a dry subject. It is quite difficult to make it that interesting, but hopefully, it was just interesting enough that you will remember bits, and hopefully, down the track, you will remember some of these things. And when you're in a working situation, you'll have a little bit of an insight that maybe other people won't have. And I think that's a really nice thing to have in the degree, is something that is actually making you think about the broader creative community. And hopefully you understand creativity a bit more and understand your place within the creative industry and how valuable you are. And I wish you all the best. So contact me over the weekend if you need to about the assessment. Otherwise, I think the next time I see you guys is when you're doing your final projects.
Wait, are you teaching final projects?
I'm supervising. There's not a lot of teaching involved in the final project.
You know what I mean, though. You're like,
yes.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I'm running the final projects. Yeah.
All right, because I'm doing creative project next trimester.
Beauty. Great. Well, I'll have you for that. So thank you very much, everybody. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed it, and good luck. Enjoy your break. Once you've gotten through past Sunday, have a great break, and I'll see you fresh in next trimester. So will I be seeing you, Andrew? Are you doing a project next trimester? Great.
Yeah.
And what about you, Hannah?
Yes, also.
Great.
Yeah.
Great. So the beat goes on.
Next trimester.
Yay. We'll see you in a couple of weeks. So have a great break.
Thank you.
Okay. See you, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Oh, sugar.